Well, well, well. Another show. It's Wednesday. Bob, you said earlier it's Hump Day. Was that from like Guardians of the Galaxies or Thor or some shit?
No, I'm just saying it.
Doesn't one of those characters say that shit all the time just to be?
I don't know.
Either way, it's Wednesday. Is it? And it's Wednesday. Hump Day is because of like what is where's
It's
that?
the middle of the work week, so you're getting over the hump.
Why wouldn't it be a valley? I feel like it's the worst day of the week.
You're good. You coast Thursday, Friday. You're just coasting downhill.
I started coasting on Monday.
I know, yeah.
All right.
We're not a valid office to compare that to.
Fair enough. Today we've got Christian Toto, founder of Hollywood and Toto, the right take on entertainment. You're a film critic.
Indeed, yeah. I've been doing it for about 20 years now.
And how's that gone, being someone who's not... I think I've heard you talk to other people about this, and the general consensus amongst most reasonable people is that folks in entertainment, particularly in Hollywood, have lost their minds and blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's that. I think, and I've heard you mention this before, that they're just, well, you haven't said they're cowards. I'll say that for you. But, the scenario you describe is cowardice, right? So it's like the difference, there's a good, in one of the interviews I've seen of yours, and maybe it's in the book, you draw a comparison between Mark Wahlberg and Jimmy Kimmel, right? Both of whom have done some sketchy shit in the past, maybe. Marky Mark when he was a child, really. He was 19, I think. Kimmel when he was in his late 30s, which is quite a bit different. And he did blackface and a number of other things that weren't exactly kosher. But because he's cozied up to the wokeness in Hollywood, his crimes kind of go unmentioned. And because Mark Wahlberg is just apolitical in general and doesn't get involved in any of that stuff, his get brought up anytime, he gets brought up. So I don't think it's that they've lost their mind. I think they're really smart. They're just cowards. They're afraid to say what they think.
Well, I think it's fear across the board, but I think it's cowardly when you have people who have the cachet to fight back and don't. Like I mentioned Stephen King quite a bit because one of the richest authors around, has got decades of goodwill. Certainly doesn't need love and affection at this point. And if he was canceled for any reason, he'd just fall back on his pile of money. But when the cancel culture mob came for him, he basically said, yes, you're right, I'm wrong, and did an apology tour. So I think, I have some empathy for actors and talent who are just starting out, who are new, who don't have the financial resources, and who are afraid of what's going on in the culture. And they know that if they say the wrong thing, that they may never rise to the top. They may never get that great gig. But I also have a different feel for people who are at or near the top, like the Jimmy Kimmels, the Stephen Colberts, who either cheer on cancel culture or pretend like it's not an existential threat to creative freedom, because it is.
Right. I mean, so The Rock supported Joe Rogan and then didn't support Joe Rogan. And then immediately after that, a video of him, which most people had already seen, mocking Asian people, came out but nothing. Like there was no further discussion of it. It's very bizarre to me how that happens. But I guess it is, everybody kind of does that. Republicans have been pretending like they're still conservatives and that have an R at the end of their name in political office for 30 years now. So that's expanding over. I'm just, the point is everybody kind of does that. But this one seems particularly egregious because you're holding people to a standard that essentially can disrupt, if not outright, end their career in entertainment, right?
Yeah, and it's often for things that were done years ago, decades ago, that was at the time considered either appropriate or not outrageously offensive. So, how do you live a life and try to be a good person and then think, okay, well, I don't know what our culture will look like 10 years from now. Maybe things I'm saying, maybe shows I'm producing right now will be deemed offensive in 10, 20 years, or maybe even earlier. So it's this whole, culture where you have to kind of walk on eggshells. You don't know what's right, what's wrong. And also, it's also wildly inconsistent. Like you said, if you kind of toe the progressive line, there's a good chance you'll get away with all the junk in your back in your past. But if you don't kind of align with that worldview, you're more susceptible. It's like Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart was a very apolitical guy, very funny, very upbeat guy. If you look at him on social media, he's very positive, and he doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of politics. So when his material from like 10 or so years ago resurfaced, and it was kind of crude about having a gay son, he was ripe for attack, and they kicked him off the Oscar hosting duties. So that's where we are.
Yeah, that's really fun. I can't imagine Kevin Hart taking a political stance, right? I mean, it seemed like for a very long time, comedy was the one bastion of entertainment that was kind of unaffected by that. And then George Bush came around, and to get sometime around 2003, 2004, to get an easy applause break, you just said, "Oh, Bush sucks," in a stand-up room, and everybody's like, "Wow, you're so brave to say that." So you've written this book. It's titled Virtue Bombs: How Hollywood Got Woke and Lost Its Soul. You've been covering Hollywood for a long time, both culture and film. How did this start, do you think? Because it used to be, even into the 70s, I mean, you're talking about like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and people like that were some of the most famous dudes in Hollywood through the 60s and 70s, right? And then Clint Eastwood through the 70s and 80s. Bruce Willis as well was one of the top action stars. He's a noted Republican. But then it went a little wild somewhere. And where was it, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think that Hollywood got much more political during the Bush years. The anti-war fervor certainly kicked in a way that I hadn't seen before. I think that's one change that is noticeable. But I think what's happening now in the culture, in Hollywood culture, is either a reflection of or an outgrowth of the overall culture that we're living through. A couple of years ago, they made a movie, No Safe Spaces, about what's going on in college campuses. And they said, by the way, this might leak into the real world. And of course, it leaked in a very aggressive fashion in record time. So I think Hollywood is reflecting that to a certain degree. I also think that Hollywood, I mentioned fear before. I think Hollywood has always been fearful, the community. You've got actors who are afraid of the younger, prettier star behind them. You've got actors who are afraid if their next movie bombs, they may not get the best scripts, down the road. Are they good looking enough? What happens if they get wrinkled, they lose their hair? So I think fear is baked into the cake, but now you kind of layer on this sort of woke mindset where, oh my gosh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I say the right thing well enough on social media? So I think it's been kind of bubbling up, but I think it really kind of hit warp speed. Maybe 2016, I remember the Ghostbusters debacle, the 4 female Ghostbusters, and how the media treated that movie and how the culture treated that movie, how it was important, it was empowering. And if you had any sort of quibbles about the movie, you were deemed a misogynist. And I think that was one of those moments where people think, well, oh my gosh, things are changing, the culture is changing. I think even film critics reviewed that one on a curve, hoping to kind of boost it. And, and that's not even me saying that. Richard Roper, a left-leaning film critic, mentioned that a while ago. So it happens in fits and starts. I think it does sort of mirror the culture at large. But I think that the political nature of Hollywood really did kick in during the Bush years. And then Trump, of course, was just poured rocket fuel all over everything.
Sure. Do you think it's weird in the new Ghostbusters, same as the old one, that the as inclusive as they tried to be, the black lead character was still a blue-collar person while everybody else was a well-educated white woman? Is that weird to you? Like, how tone-deaf exactly are these folks? And maybe that's the problem. It's like this impossible-to-meet purity standard. Like, no matter how far you go, you can never get to a place where you're completely beyond reproach, and that's kind of how it's a fucking stupid system, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we overanalyze everything. And look at that movie. It's Leslie Jones. She is big. She is tall. She has a very boisterous, outsized personality. So I don't think you look at her and say, I'm going to make her a bookworm. I mean, that's it'd be tough to kind of swallow just based on what she brings to a movie theater. So, there were people who said, oh, look, they put the black person was the blue collar. I mean, that argument was raised at the time of the movie. So you're not wrong in a way. But at the end of the day, it is just one movie. It is just one character. If you are upset about that, then maybe make another movie with another black woman, female character who's more nuanced and more sophisticated. Then Hidden Figures came out, I guess, maybe a little bit after that movie that told the heroic story of those three female scientists who were black and how they were mistreated and how what they contributed to the space program. So there's room for lots of stories. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we kind of nitpick these certain situations, but that's what happens across the culture. But what I don't like about that is that it often will prevent storytellers from telling the stories they want to share, because you want to have the creative freedom to say, hey, this story I'm writing, there's a black character and he's downtrodden, but you know what? He is the hero. He does rise up. He does have a wonderful arc, and I want to share that story. And if you kind of short circuit that process, I think that's where the art kind of fails.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I've always kind of rebuffed the idea that we should be repackaging old things with new moralistic viewpoints. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't really make any sense. That's not who that, like, it's kind of an erasure situation, right? I mean, one of the big problems in the West right now is that we solve problems so well that the next generation forgets why we had to solve that problem in the first place, and they recreate the problem by jettisoning the very reasonable and effective solution that we created for it. And, when you start taking people, when you start reimagining who characters were based on today, like, so there's this, Douglas Murray's got a new book out, The War on the West. And in it, he talks about how Mikhail Foucault is a child rapist, but that all gets covered up because people believe in postmodernism. Marx was a notorious racist, and that gets covered up because people like socialism and Marxism and stuff. And the response to that is, well, they were men of their time. Like, yeah, of course. Everybody is a man or woman of their time. People are going to behave the way people behaved then. I think you make the point that Disney movie that The Rock did, I don't know what the fuck it's called because that's garbage television to me. But
Jungle Cruise, maybe?
Maybe Jungle Cruise. That's so stupid. There's a scene where he's this big, powerful fucking dude, and some dude kind of subtly tells him he's gay, and he's like, "Oh, it's cool, brother," or whatever. Like, no, that's not at all what would have happened in 1910.
Exactly.
Come on, man. Like, why? What is the point of that exactly? If you're making your movie just to proselytize and propagandize, then do that and say that's what you're doing. But fuck, man, I just can't with this shit anymore. It's so hard to watch.
Yeah, someone. I was just real quick on that note about The Rock. Someone literally called Ty Cobb black in harsher terms than that, and he ran up into the stands and beat the crap out of them in like 1910.
Yeah. Ty Cobb was,
and it's really refutable. It's really easy for him to refute whether or not he was black.
Well, yeah.
But the moment you're mentioning is a really small moment in that film. But when you're in the audience, to me at least, it rips you out of the experience because it's the filmmakers trying to send a message. I have no problem with gay people at all. But yes, if you had a hard scrabble seat captain kind of guy who looked like The Rock, this big bruising guy, and then someone tenderly expresses how he's gay, that's not how things would have played out. So why would you even put it in the movie? It's such a weird little note. And again, if you want to set it in modern times, that makes perfect sense. A guy like The Rock would certainly be open to him and be supportive of him. That's wonderful. We all want that. And we don't want to see The Rock beat the hell out of the guy.
Well, that wouldn't even be
he's gay either, because then you're not rooting for The Rock, and The Rock is supposed to be the good guy. It's just this warped, twisted thing where you have to inject your ideology into stories where they don't really belong. Sometimes they do, often they don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't think it would even be a conversation today. Like if a group of people, or even just me and some other person, were doing some kind of activity, traveling somewhere, working in a shop, seeing each other in a grocery store or something, and the guy's just all of a sudden like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of gay. I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Nobody cares. What else? Are you vegan too? Shut the fuck up, man. Like, no one cares about these qualities in your life anymore. We've gotten past it, right, as a society, and I think that's where, in my opinion, the woke stuff, it wasn't just It wasn't just the stuff at universities, and it wasn't just the rebuttal to Trumpism and all this stuff. I really think it was an industrial complex to solve sexism and racism and all this other stuff that figured out that they are now antiquated, and all of their funding is going to dry up unless they convince people once again that this is the biggest possible issue that we're ever going to face in our lives. And it's just simply not true, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at what BLM is trying to tell us, they're describing an America that maybe was 60 years ago. They're not describing the America that I live in, where people of all colors and races just interact with each other and say hello at the supermarket and, you know, share a cubicle at work. It's absurd. And it's sort of, I think part of this woke ideology is tapping into this sense that things haven't changed, that things haven't evolved, that we haven't grown, and we all have. And that's a good thing. And but it's almost comical at times. But you know, this woke stuff, it's funny. My son is 13, and I don't really kind of talk about the work I do with him. I just kind of want to have. I mean, at some point I will, but I just he's a kid. I just let him be a kid. Yeah. But he comes to me. He kind of. We actually watched the Jungle Cruise movie together, and he was pointing out these sort of woke moments. I didn't say anything. I was just sitting there being a dad watching the movie with him. So it is interesting. Maybe the young generation are going to kind of fight back at this, because the 20-somethings are certainly on board, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like that is kind of the thing that happens, right? I mean, the young Reagan Republicans were anti-parents, like their boomer parents, I guess, or their whatever some of the greatest generation parents that kind of towards the later end of that generation. You know, I don't know, they went to Woodstock. They did a bunch of acid and decided that life's not fair. You know what I mean? Which is something that people always knew, that life wasn't fair, and they just realized that it was a universal constant, and there's nothing you can do about that. So maybe let's work on this whole food and drinking water situation and leave our feelings behind it. I want to get back to the choices that Hollywood seems to make. I know a lot of it is because of because of how large the Chinese box office is, like the superhero movies in particular. But now we're even seeing the superhero movies get infiltrated by China in a way that is predictable, but it's a very interesting scenario to watch. All these super woke Hollywood people kowtow to anti-gay China, right? And remove scenes and stuff like that. It's like when somebody's making a really stupid argument, and all of a sudden you can see that moment in their eyes where they realize their argument's stupid, and they don't know what to do. I feel like that's kind of where we are right now in 2021 and 22 so far with the stuff. What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, the China thing is interesting because you're right. The Hollywood activism is large and it's powerful and it's vocal. But then when China is, having concentration camps and Disney's playing footsie with them, no one says a word. So the hypocrisy is off the charts. But the interesting development with the China situation, and I believe the book is called Red Carpet, by the way. It came out just a few months ago, and it really does chronicle the Hollywood-China connection beautifully. And it's a very powerful book. But what China did basically was they studied American movie making. And they actually hired some American filmmakers as well, and basically learned how to make an American-style blockbuster. So now they're doing that, and they're putting their very pro-communist themes in their movies and pro-patriotic themes in their movies. And now the Chinese audiences are saying, well, I don't need to see the American imports. I can go watch my own country's films. So American box office overseas in China is dropping dramatically. The Chinese-made movies are rising. And all of a sudden, the movies that America had that would make a killing in China aren't making a killing or aren't even released. I know there have been multiple Marvel movies that just didn't even get released in China for a variety of reasons. So I think China will be more and more restrictive. I think the money coming from Chinese movie theaters will be less and less. And I kind of glibly say, it's kind of an echo of my book, that, Hollywood sold to China. And now what do you got for it? Because right now, I think the revenue stream continues to shrink. And I think that's the path of the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Michael Bay right? Style movies, the Christopher
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan style, maybe a little bit.
Big, glossy, loud,
Yeah.
exciting roller coasters. That's fine. We do them. We do them well, and now they can do them too.
And they're fun too. I mean, like our favorite movie stars through the 80s and 90s they weren't necessarily like Sidney Poitier and people like that. It was fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger and you know what I mean? And Van Damme and people like that who had no real acting talent at all, but they made these big, dumb movies. And we're America. We like big, dumb shit, So we've seen the fall of comedy, right? There haven't been very many good comedy movies because in a long time, because the two dudes who were making most of them, right, like Adam McKay and what's his name, Judd Apatow, they pretty much they've surrendered entirely. They're people who, just like Amy Schumer and quite a few other people, Jimmy Kimmel's one of them. They made millions of dollars climbing the ladder using whatever methodology they could think of to do that, and it was pretty funny, honestly. And then they pulled the ladder up behind them so nobody else could get up there. It's very bizarre.
Well, there's a lot of things going on. One is Adam McKay, who did like Step Brothers and Anchorman. He wants to do more political films from the left of center perspective. So that's what he's doing right now. And then Judd Apatow breaks my heart because I love his earlier films. I think not 40-Year-Old Virgin is just an absolute classic. And he's woke as you can possibly imagine. And his stuff just isn't as good as it used to be. So that's sad. But I think the more telling anecdote is Todd Phillips. Many people don't know his name, but he directed the Hangover films. Yep. I think he did Road Trip. He did a lot of, I think Old School is one of his as well. And here's a guy who makes a lot of money making these kind of bawdy, outrageous, R-rated comedies. And he gave up on it. And when he actually did Joker, which was a huge hit. And when he was doing the press for Joker, he said, you know what? I look at the culture around us and you can't do the jokes I used to do and you can't say the things you want to say. And there's all these restrictions. He's like, screw it. So that's where he is right now.
Yeah, quite a few, I think, people who have historically done comedies like that, from script writing all the way to acting and producing, have kind of bailed on it now, or they're doing independent stuff. And so with this stuff going on in China, the more restrictive they become, obviously there's going to be a diminishing return on blockbuster movies, which is the blockbuster movie is the tent pole of the American film industry. That's why people continue to go. Like, I'll go watch some artsy thing for every now and again, but most people go to the theaters to see big explosions. You know what I mean? Dinosaurs come to life with Chris Pratt trying to tame them and shit like that. So are we going to see this? Is the blockbuster going to shrink away from the big screen now? And if so, is the big screen going to even persist in America?
I think the big screen has bounced back a little better than I thought. A few months ago, I was pretty pessimistic about where the theaters would go after COVID. We are seeing some big results. The Batman film did very well, Spider-Man No Way Home. So I think we'll continue to see movies like that, if they're good, will kind of draw a pretty big crowd. But I wonder about sort of the smaller films, or even just the mid-range ones, the dramas, the ones that, that are more sophisticated. Do they have a home in a theater, or are they best served as video on demand? So I think the marketplace will kind of shake out over the next couple of years. I'm a little pessimistic on that front. And maybe, if it's a Ben Affleck drama about a guy dealing with sobriety, maybe that's best served as a video on demand. I watch it at home. No one's chomping popcorn behind me. And then the next Spider-Man film is something you want to see in the theater with a big screen with a whole bunch of your buddies. So, maybe that's the way it's meant to be.
Right, but those movies are those Marvel movies, to a greater degree than the DC movies, are like $150 to $250 million budgets.
Oh yeah, huger, bigger.
And some crest 300. Is it gonna? Where's the money gonna come from? Like, how are these studios? Like, 4 of the 8 studios are at least partially owned by Chinese companies, right? In Hollywood. So, where's the money coming from?
Well, I mean, it used to be DVD sales. That's pretty much gone.
Right.
Blu-ray, the same. If the Chinese market continues to kind of shrink, they're going to have to make more and more in America. So it'll be interesting to see how they can kind of prop up these huge budgets and still be profitable. It's hard. And, when these movies flop, they often flop in spectacular fashion. So, you could have a movie that was maybe 150 to 200 million to make, and that doesn't include the marketing and the promotion, which can often double the price sometimes. If they make 30 million at the U.S. box office and don't make any traction overseas, you're losing a lot of money. So I don't know the dollars and cents behind the scenes, but just on the surface, it seems like there could be real trouble ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and that's depressing. Honestly, we like to be entertained, and it's that rare. For me, the biggest entertainment is that rare confluence between like a great action movie that's also kind of introspective but also self-aware at the same time. You know what I mean? Like Apocalypse Now or something like that, where, yeah, there's a lot of those action scenes and a lot of crazy shit, but there's a great script, great acting, and you see it quite a bit. I mean, it's not like Hollywood's forgotten how to make movies. They're still really good at it, but they're choosing to stop doing what makes them successful, which is to be relatable, I guess.
Before we started talking, I was on Twitter and I saw a story about the new Doctor Strange movie, and it mentioned how the director, Sam Raimi, didn't seem to know or have an ending to the film while he was shooting the film. And he was saying how frustrating that was and how that was an impediment to him making the movie. And I'm thinking, my God, this is one of these movies with all the resources in the world. You don't have a script. You don't have an ending. You don't have a guide or a roadmap to what you're doing. And I saw it. I thought it was a bit of a mess. Not horrible, but, that is often the case with these big kind of blockbusters. I heard a similar story years ago about the Pirates of the Caribbean movie where Johnny Depp and the director were kind of looking at each other like, what's happening in the scene? We don't even know. And when they don't know, maybe we don't know. So, you got to be careful with these big movies. They get to be too big for their own good, really. And you kind of lose the fact that, hey, it should be a story. It should move us. It should kind of reach out to us and should make us think a little bit in between all the explosions and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, sure. I mean, yeah, that's, I've definitely gotten writing on my own, whether it was creative stuff or, back in the day writing national security white papers and stuff like that. I'll get halfway through a paragraph from time to time and be like, I didn't really have any idea what the fuck I was planning here. I'm going to erase all this and start over. I don't know how you do it continuity-wise as a showrunner or a script or a screenwriter, right? How do you maintain you know how much extra effort it is to maintain continuity if you don't have that clear A to B linear, even if you have A, B, and C plots and all this other stuff going on, if you don't have the ending yet, how do you it has to result in unnecessary expositional dialogue at some point, right? To explain shit at the end.
Yeah,
because people
look
are
at the recent Star Wars movies. You had three movies with three different sort of screenwriters and three different directions, and nothing seemed to make sense. And it seemed like this movie was kind of trying to explain the last movie, and it didn't have the cohesiveness that the great Star Wars movies had. And we look back. I grew up on Star Wars. I don't want to watch those movies ever again. I think they're terrible, and because there wasn't a plan, there wasn't a sort of a guide to what we're going to do with this story. And what a disaster! And of course, we saw the box office for each of those three last Star Wars films shrink each time out. I mean, they made a lot of money, no doubt, but could have made a lot more if they actually had a story.
Sure, but I do have to admit, as much as I'm irritated with Disney for a lot of the stuff they do, and I'm not particularly a fan of Pedro Pascal either, just because he's kind of a cunt in my opinion. But Jon Favreau has done a pretty amazing job with some kind of like canon adjacent Star Wars stuff and bringing it in and making a great show. Like The Mandalorian is a really good show. I think
that show saved Star Wars, honestly.
Yeah,
that trilogy really kind of hurt a lot of fans, didn't kind of disillusioned a lot of them, and then Jon Favreau comes along and saves it. And by the way, Jon Favreau basically kicked off the MCU with Iron Man. He directed that. He also directed the best modern day Christmas story in Elf. So he's a really talented guy.
Yeah.
So not a surprise, but I think he did a wonderful job with The Mandalorian and made it feel like Star Wars, made it feel authentic, wasn't woke, and introduced some powerful new characters and kind of shoved it back into the conversation again. That's what it needed.
Yeah, I mean, good on him, to be honest. Like, you don't hear him talking too much about politics and why it's funny to say that and it'd be like, oh, that's good, but why should we expect him to? I don't give a fuck what Jon Favreau's politics are any more than I care what my chef's politics are. Does it affect the steak? No.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Cook my steak. I'm hungry. I don't give a shit about any of this other stuff. And he's got a lot more. Like The Mandalorian has got another season coming out. The book of Boba Fett. I don't think he's involved in the new ObiWan thing, is he?
No, he's not. So that
who's that?
I'll look it up real quick. That latest trailer dropped today.
Is it good?
Yeah,
that fucking man. That's the one I'm most excited about right now because it's my understanding is it's Obi-Wan after he gives Luke to his aunt and uncle, right?
It's about
like that
10
ground.
years after he gives him to his aunt and uncle. And I was impressed that they got Joel Edgerton back for that, by the way, because they cast him as Lars Olsen whenever he was like a nobody. Rupert Fiennes. That's not him. I can't see who's doing this, but yeah, it's not Favreau.
Hang on, I'll look it up.
Deborah Chow. Joby Harold.
She's a great, fuck man, that's a great cast. Good Lord. Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen's coming back as Darth Vader. So do you know anything about this?
I don't know a ton about the show. It comes out later this month. It's going to debut. We shall see. It's so interesting. They've had much better success on the small screen than the big screen. I think it'd be the opposite. But I don't know. I mean, the stuff that is successful now that they're trying to do is resuscitating old characters. I guess the Mandalorian is a new character, so that was a big win. But I don't know. It's been a little hit or miss from Team Star Wars. But yeah. They have new movies that they've talked about that have been kind of put on the shelf. They were going to give the Game of Thrones duo a chance to make some movies. That seemed to fall apart. Rian Johnson, who butchered The Last Jedi, it seemed like he was going to work with them. I don't know if that's going to happen. So you think about such a successful brand, how do you screw it up? I think they've mostly screwed it up with some minor exceptions.
Yeah, and it's maybe it's just back in the day, you only really had HBO or Showtime, right, to put out a series. Like if you were going to make something like The Mandalorian or something like that, you can't necessarily with a budget like that. That's not going on network television, probably, right? So it's going to be some kind of premium service, and you're kind of limited there now with all the streaming stuff. I feel like it's probably better for as many, like a normal movie is going to have an A, B, and C plot, maybe some other stuff going on, but typically that's your formula. You even see it in most screenwriting software, but in Star Wars, there's like 1,000 things going on all the time, and I think it's better for the small screen. Like you need multiple episodes for that story to be told. And now there's speaking of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon is supposed to come out this year too, right?
Yeah, and there's going to be a new Lord of the Rings. I mean, they're recycling quite a bit. I wrote about this recently. There's going to be a new Dirty Dancing film with Jennifer Grey. They're going to make a prequel to the Hunger Games movies. And, people get grumpy about this, and I totally get it. But, part of this is our fault because when they do these kind of offshoots, these reboots, remakes, whatever you want to call them, we often go see it or we give it more attention than we do an original story. So it kind of empowers Hollywood to say, well, we're going to keep doing exactly what you're telling us we want to, you want from us. So that's, as much as I complain about that, I think we are part and parcel reason why it's happening.
Sure. What else are we part and parcel to? I mean, I try to, I do try to behave in a way that, reflects how I actually think and believe, which is to say not spending my money on shit that I find morally reprehensible, like the government does, for example. Like it would be nice if the government didn't rob me once a year and then use the money on stuff that I think is fucked up. That'd be great. So I try to do that in my personal life too, or not do that rather. But it's hard.
Well, I mean, I think it's an important point. I think it's something that's becoming more vital as culture changes and how the culture wars rage on. Because if you're right of center and you want to support X or Y or you hate other things, you have the means to kind of make a statement. You could support art that you think is important. You know, there's so much art being created right now on the periphery, out of the Hollywood ecosystem. A lot of comedians are kind of just doing Patreon, YouTube, podcasts. And these are the people who are the real rebels in comedy. These are the folks who are kind of saying it like it is and telling the jokes that others are too afraid to tell. Well, you know, support them, you know, subscribe to their platforms and use your economic clout in a good way. And if you think that what Disney's doing, introducing sexual material to young kids, is wrong, then cut that cord to Disney Plus and don't go see the movies. And it's a bit of a sacrifice. Disney makes some good stuff, but we have to send a message in some ways. And if you don't, then you'll get more of it.
How have you done? I mean, being somebody from who's not. I don't know much about your politics. I just know that you consider yourself to be center right, I guess. That's not a very popular position in the crowds that you run in, right? Like, how do you do your job?
You know, I have to say it really hasn't affected me dramatically. I live in Denver. I cover Hollywood. I mean, in our day and age, you can be anywhere and cover Hollywood. You don't have to be in California. But I try to conduct myself as professionally as possible. I try not to be cruel or mean-spirited when I cover content on my website and my podcast. When I critique someone, I don't say, well, they're ugly or they're fat or they're gross. I'll say, you know what? I don't agree with this opinion, and here's why. And here's a link to my argument as to why. So I think doing all those things has protected me against some blowback. But you're right. I mean, the work that I do, my peers are overwhelmingly aggressively liberal, and often now they are showing it. 20 years ago, if you read movie reviews, even if the critic was liberal, it was pretty neutral. It was pretty down the road. You didn't really get the sense of the politics of the critic. That's no longer the case at all. And it's almost every year it gets worse. So, the fact that I am right of center, in theory, could put a cultural target on my back. But I've been able to kind of hang on so far, and fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, look, it seems like we're onto the new Wedge issue now, right? Like, this has been, the Roe thing has been maybe... In the media, it's been considered the Wedge issue for a long time. But if you look at exit polling, it's usually like 3 to 5% of people have abortion rights as one of their top 3 reasons for voting the way they did. That'll probably change this year, right? I assume that's going to mobilize quite a few people. But it's like the art of being a film critic is it's so I think people misrepresent what it is. They think it's like, it's just some fucking asshole that couldn't get into the industry themselves and they're being nitpicky about somebody else's stuff. Like, no, it's like an examination of the technical skill being used, the effort, the vision, and then the execution of all of it, and then all of that set against the backdrop of larger society and how it all fits together and all that stuff. I mean, it's basically like, it's more sociology than it is anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, I also think of it as a very throwback. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it worth your time? Because we're all super busy, and there's never been more content flooding our homes or smartphones or tablets or everything. So I think my job is to say, is this worth your time? And I think that's something that maybe critics forget or put in the distance, where that should be front and center. Again, I think my reviews do encompass a lot of things you're saying. And I think it's one of the reasons why I enjoy what I do. And I think it's so interesting is because there are all these different factors. What does a movie say? The 1984 Ghostbusters had a very libertarian message. Sort of get off my back government. And how did that incorporate itself into the story? That's fascinating. The early 80s, kind of the slobs versus the snobs of Caddyshack. That has a cultural significance as well, in addition to being just funny. Yeah. So I think these are all things of consequence. We can all talk about them. And at the end of the day, I used to go see movies with my buddies back in high school and just spend like an hour talking about the movies we just saw in a diner. And that's, in a way, it's kind of just what I do now. It's just a different form.
Yeah, but it's it's a skill to be able to discuss and even opine on something, but not take a position on it. I think that's something that people have lost the ability to do. Like we can have a conversation about without me, like we should be able to have a conversation about something without you necessarily knowing exactly how I feel about it. If it's a critique that includes the technical skill, I guess, of making a good piece of art, whatever it happens to be. Like if it's a comedy, is it actually funny? Is it funny? And maybe it's a little woke too, but is it funnier than it is woke? Then cool, that's probably worth my time. Then I can deal with that shit. I'm not gonna put somebody on blast for leaking their opinions out or anything, as long as the product is good. You know what I mean?
And I also try to be transparent. I do reviews for a DC news station, and when I do those reviews, I am as straight down the line as humanly possible and try to hide whatever biases I may have. But on my website, hollywoodandtoto.com, I'm a right of center film critic, and I let you know that. But at the same time, I've seen liberal or left-leaning films that I thought were quite good. And I'll be darned if I'm going to kind of say, oh, that wasn't good because it didn't agree with my worldview. Well, that's stupid. Was it funny? Was it interesting? Was it clever? And I don't have to have movies that align with my groupthink or my worldview 100%. That's childish. So I think a good critic should be able to kind of say, hey, I don't agree with this point of view, but the characters were compelling and the story was interesting and it kept my attention and it made me think. That's good.
Well, what is the hallmark of a good film for you? Like I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than you can just like a 2-sentence answer there. But what are you looking for when you go into this?
When I go to a movie screening, I have a pad and a pen in my hand, and I like it the best when I just like put the pad and pen down and just watch the movie,
right?
Because I'm there to kind of technically write notes. But if I get so wrapped up in the experience, I'm like, screw it. I'll when I go home, I'll type on my computer and I'll write my notes down. I want to get lost in the story. It's as simple as that. I want to be engaged. I don't want to be bored. I don't want to look at my watch. And it's funny. My wife was having like a health problem recently, and everything turned out fine. But it was on my mind significantly when I saw the last Spider-Man movie, No Way Home, and I thought, well, probably wouldn't enjoy the movie. I got this weighing in my mind. But the movie was so fun and so diverting and so clever and such an homage to fans that I didn't think about my wife's situation. Like, that's movies. It transports you. I think it's as simple as that.
That's a really interesting take. So you said that you've watched some stuff that politically was a little scaled away from where you are, but you still found the movie to be really good. Can you give me some examples of that?
The perfect example for me is Booksmart. It came out maybe 2 years ago about 2 teenage girls who are about to graduate high school, and they've always been kind of goodies. They studied hard, and now they want to kind of party. It was maybe the most woke movie you'll ever see. Aggressively woke, in your face woke. The characters were woke, the situations. But you know what? It had a great visual style. It had funny bits. The story kind of kept my attention. And even though I hate all this woke stuff, I was entertained and I gave it a good review. So, I mean, I can't deny any of those things, but I let my readers know what it was and what it was, the messages in there. But if it's a good movie, it's a good movie. I'd be remiss if I didn't admit that.
Sure. I mean, I think that used to be the case, though. A lot of people really enjoyed things like Born on the 4th of July and Apocalypse Now and some of and Full Metal Jacket, but they don't exactly paint like these are extremely popular movies among people in the military right now, even now. So people who have a deep sense of patriotism that runs so far that they are willing to go join the actual military, right? But they still find these films that are deeply critical, not just of the government, but of the military itself. And they find them really compelling because they tell true stories, right? I think people's bullshit meters go off, and that's where you start to lose people. I mean, that's a big problem that's happening now because you're told, everybody's going to die from this virus, but protesting for BLM is more important, right?
So, but my buddy John Nolte at Breitbart News has a way of describing the woke storytelling. He says it's not real, it's not human, it's not authentic, and that's why it's such a problem. You mentioned these anti-war films. They're coming from a place of authenticity. Oliver Stone fought in the Vietnam War. So you've got these voices that are adding real drama to what you see on the screen. They're not making it up. They've lived it, they've experienced it, maybe they've researched it, and that comes through the screen. And you mentioned the BS detectors we all have. Yeah, we can sense crap when we see it, and we can sense something that's inauthentic. You don't even often have to describe it. You can almost feel or taste it. And that's why some people in the military who maybe don't agree with all those views understand this is an important film or this is something, a voice that should be heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it tracks along this. One of the key features of the culture war, in my opinion, is that in philosophy there is the way things are, and then there is the way things ought to be. Right? Those are the two. I guess guardrails for life, right? So you kind of, there's a delta in between there, and you can make some change from time to time, and you should, right? Try to make things better, obviously. But when you confuse the way things ought to be with the way things are, like when people say, well, that's not fair, like, well, fucking no shit, dude. Nothing is fair. What the hell? Do you think the fact that 99.997% of all species that have existed on this planet are now extinct is fair? Of course it's not fair. Why would it be? But I think that's the part where where these overly woke things lose me. When I'm forced to participate in somebody else's delusions about how things ought to be, when that's just not reflective of reality, and because you can't argue with a position like that because it's not rooted in reality. It's not a falsifiable claim, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're hitting on a good point. And we sense it, and I think, it's kind of a glib line that get woke, go broke, but there's a lot of truth to that people, and it's so interesting because often people maybe they don't see the product that is woke in question, but they kind of feel it, they sense it, they smell it, and they avoid it. So, the recent Terminator film, which I actually thought was decent, but it had a lot of woke elements into it, was a box office dud by most comparisons. And I think that people just had the sense that, yeah, this is where it's going to go. They're kind of pushing aside Arnold Schwarzenegger. They're playing up this female empowerment angles. Maybe that's not for me. I'll go watch Terminator 2 again. That's my speed.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have another show, and like every other show, we watch an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Just live watch it and film ourselves. Last week, it was Commando. Dumbest movie I've ever seen in my life. But the funny part is we tried to watch Goonies first, and I had never seen it before. I've never been a big fan of those kid movies, even growing up. We tried to watch that, and it is unwatchable now, in my opinion. It's
one you have to watch as a kid, and then you watch as an adult, and you connect with your memories. Yeah. I agree.
But even the two adults, my girlfriend and our buddy who were there watching it with me, were both looking at me like, "Hey, are you done with this yet?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this is stupid." But we switched to Commando, and it's so stupid. First of all, he is an Austrian dude. He's a retired colonel in the American Special Forces somehow, which is interesting enough. And then one of the guys, like the main antagonist in the film, is a guy who's apparently from like South Africa, who's also a retired Special Forces guy in America. Now that would have been the case in the 1950s, but not so much now. And then he meets this flight attendant, and instead of getting her to safety and going on about his little war, he brings her with him everywhere he goes. I mean, it's crazy. It's dumb. It's so dumb, but I really enjoyed that. Like it was 90 minutes of pure pleasure for me. And I find myself more and more going back and watching, like you were talking about with T2, like going back and watching these movies, not because they had one message or another, but because they had no message. And that's kind of what I was looking for when I went to the screen in the first place.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of movie comedies, maybe like between 2000 and 2012 or so, give or take, because that's before the woke movement became. That's when we can just tell jokes and be outrageous and just give these crazy situations, and it's liberating, man. When you've been forced to kind of watch woke comedy, or you miss comedy in general, and then you see it and you hear that voice that voice that's unencumbered by anyone. It's amazing. It's like gasping for air after you've been holding your breath for like a minute or two. It's wonderful. And I miss that. I miss those kind of comedy. I grew up in Howard Stern, man. He just would just say anything, and he was fresh. He was bold. He was crazy. He was irreverent. He was smart. He was introspective. Howard Stern's gone. The guy on the radio now is no longer that guy, and the culture that we're living in right now wouldn't know what to do with him.
This is a kind of a depressing thing to do, but Here are some of the best comedies of just 2008. You ready for this? You guys ready? Pineapple Express, fucking hilarious movie. Love it. I've seen that movie 1,000 times. Role Models, hilarious. Semi-Pro, hilarious. Step Brothers, hilarious. Let's see what else is on here. Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
That's a good year for comedy, by the way.
Yeah, Tropic Thunder.
Damn.
There's so many good movies just in this one year. You don't. I mean, that Zohan movie was kind of stupid, but I enjoyed it. But it's kind of goofy. But anyways, yeah, that to me is the best comedy year of my lifetime. And
I can't think of another year that had that many hits. Honestly, that good stuff too. And Tropic Thunder. Do you have to say you can't make that today? Isn't it obvious? And I think Robert Downey Jr. was up for a Best Supporting Actor nomination for being in blackface. But the joke, it's funny. The joke wasn't on African Americans; it was on egotistical actors and how willing they are to go to get awards. I mean, context is everything.
Yeah, that's the problem with fundamentalism, though. There's no sense of irony or satire involved. I mean, that and woke is a religion, and it is a fundamentalist religion for sure. And like Blazing Saddles, that movie is not about promoting old hillbilly racists. It's about making fun of racist people.
Yeah,
like the whole movie is just about that. It's about like making fun of robber barons and racist people. Basically, that's what it is. And somehow it's like, oh, you're doing this thing and what we shouldn't glorify this character. Nobody's glorifying the guy. It's a fucking Jewish dude whose family survived the Holocaust making a film about racist people to make fun of them because he's a comedian and that's what he does. Everybody can like if he was a dramatical writer, he probably would have been involved in Schindler's List, but he wasn't. So he's involved in this. You know what I mean?
Well, Joe Rogan really nailed this whole issue. A few weeks back, he was talking about comedy, how we like the conversation we're having right now. They don't make great comedies anymore. And he said one of the reasons why is that when you have a character who's behaving badly on screen, there's a sense on the woke left that you're condoning it or celebrating it or honoring it. But no, you're not doing any of those things. You're saying, here's a wacky character on screen that we can laugh at. There's nothing wrong with that. I always bring up the Animal House example where Bluto is trying to look in the sorority house's window, look at the girls who are getting naked. It's funny. It's outrageous. Do I want my son when he's that age to do that to sorority girls? Of course not. I'd kill him. But, why can't we laugh at that? Why can't we laugh at people behaving badly? Why do we have to have role models across the screen? It's not the way life works. It's not the way comedies work. It's ridiculous.
Well,
that's
where
we are.
The rule used to be, and luckily South Park started when this was the rule because they've not stopped in any way. But the rule used to be that as long as you point out that the character is an asshole, then it's fine. And that's one of the things. Inside the Actors Studio, they were talking about The Sopranos one time. I don't remember who the guest was. I don't think it was Tony. I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about The Sopranos and the brilliance of the fact that he was in the psychiatrist's office, right? And how it's basically like a soliloquy every single episode of him, expositional dialogue, but it's in context, right? So it makes sense. And you're really hearing how much of a sociopathic piece of shit he is. You know what I mean? Like, because when you see people act a certain way in context, your brain, just because it is the way it is, tries to, like, okay, that's, maybe I would have done the same thing in that situation, or maybe whatever, right? Your brain is just automatically contextualizing things. But then when you start hearing somebody make excuses for themselves, now they're a dick, right? And I think that's important, and that used to be the rule, and now it's not anymore. Like, you can't even, people just have no tolerance for discomfort, I guess. I don't know what it is. And that's something that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, I mean, we're at a point where if I'm offended, that becomes an issue. That becomes I can't be offended. I can't be put in an uncomfortable position. Dave Chappelle, not his last special, but the one before it, I thought was genius because he was making me uncomfortable. He was kind of stating positions, often things I didn't agree with. But I'm thinking, okay, why is he doing that? And the more I watch, I'm thinking, he's challenging me. He's making me uncomfortable and bringing up these really interesting points because he's saying, okay, you believe this, well, why? Shouldn't you question why you believe this? I mean, and only a Dave Chappelle, who's so good and so smart, could do that. But why can't we have those comedy voices who are kind of challenging us and pushing us into uncomfortable positions? It's a good thing. We shouldn't be so sheltered and so unable to accept other opinions that we shrink into our safe space for this. It's absurd, but that's where we are, and that's where the culture is pushing us. And the whole area of victimhood is like the ultimate triumph at this point. If you could be a victim, you are atop the heap, and it's sad.
Yeah, that is sad. It used to be the job of philosophers, I guess, before the middle part of the second millennia, to, I guess, send things up, make people think like that. Playwrights, Shakespeare in particular, like challenging authority in England, as he did, both comedically and dramatically, I suppose, but it's especially in comedy, satirizing things. It's such an important process for a human being to entertain an idea that they don't agree with and understand why somebody else might believe it. Not so they'll come to believe what the other person believes, but to understand there's a reason for it, and they're not just evil. That's not my enemy because they think that. They went through this, and here's their explanation for why they think what they think. Maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't. But that even if it does make sense, that doesn't mean you have to adopt their idea. It means that, I understand that. That person's not evil. We just happen to disagree, and now we can find some kind of, middle ground, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is what should happen on college campuses across the country. You should be exposed to a variety of views, and then you should be able to defend your views. And I think it's one of the key advantages that people on the right have against the left is that we're used to that. We see the other point of view all the time. It's often shoved at our face. And if you're a person on the left, you can basically kind of go through life without ever getting bumped around, without ever experiencing another point of view, because the media and Hollywood and academia are all on your wavelength. And then all of a sudden you're challenged and you think, well, okay, why do you think that? You freak out. And that's when I think you get called a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, you name it, because they don't have the ability to actually debate and to counter your views. And that's a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, if you can't steel man the other person's argument, then you don't really understand your own, frankly.
Yeah.
Tell us about the book before we get out of here. Tell us what's in it, and what message you're trying to get across.
Yeah, I mean, it really covers woke Hollywood. It's called Virtue Bombs, how Hollywood got woke and lost its soul. And it looks at what's going on either both behind the scenes and also what we see on screens. So it looks at these gender reboots, which are all about empowerment and not about entertainment. It's about virtue signaling celebrities who are absurd and laughable. But it really is just an attack on free expression, creativity, and how dangerous that is to the culture. And I think that what you see in Hollywood bleeds into the rest of the culture. I mentioned that about colleges. I think the same thing holds true in Hollywood. Just a quick example: Scarlett Johansson, one of the most attractive actresses in Hollywood. She's talented. She's got it all. When the woke mob came for her, she bowed quickly and did the apology tour. Now, if someone that powerful can't stand up for their principles, what chance do you or I have, who are far less, have less clout, less cachet, less ability to kind of defend ourselves? It really does matter. But it also ends with a bit of hope and looks at some of the voices who are kind of speaking out against this and why they, I think, will win eventually. I just don't know how long it's going to take.
Yeah. I mean, what's your advice for people like the regular person who is a consumer, right, of this type of material? Because you don't see... You don't see a whole lot of people taking stands, certainly not publicly, right? I mean, Chris Pratt is really quiet about it, but he does not buckle to anybody. He never apologizes for anything he believes. He's a believer, I guess, Christian guy. I'm not. I don't really care about any of that stuff. But I don't feel like somebody should have to defend themselves for their personal beliefs in a way that where your job is on the line. Like, that's insane to me. We would never have thought to do any of this before. And it's super interesting that Hollywood is one of the leaders on it too, because the McCarthyism bullshit that happened back in the day, you would think they would learn their lesson. I mean, that's the lesson is, and it's the same thing with this disinformation governance board nonsense. Like, imagine the tool you're creating in the hands of your worst enemy. And would you still create the tool? Most people would say no, right? And that's the hallmark of good legislation is it's clear, concise, and enforceable. The concise part, rather, is that it applies only to this one limited thing, so it can't be abused. That's the whole point. Hollywood was severely abused by McCarthyism in the 50s and even into the 60s. I mean, like to an insane level of, like, forget about Watergate. Hoover was spying on everybody in Hollywood. And, man, you would think that would be a good lesson. Like, we can't let that happen again, even if it's in our favor. And I don't understand why they've completely forgotten about this.
It's amazing. It's a great point. And it's something that Hollywood has been, I guess the term is cosplaying or cosplaying the blacklist for the last 20, 30 years. Different movies, different documentaries, different productions. They keep retelling elements of that story again and again. The Being the Ricardos was about that as well. That came out late last year. And they didn't learn the lessons of it. They clearly didn't learn the lessons, and they're A-okay with it if it's on their side or seemingly on their side. It is one of the biggest tragedies that you can imagine in Hollywood, and I think they're going to look back at this period of time with an incredible amount of shame, and if they don't, they should.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, well, we got to get out of here. Thanks for coming today. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media, where they can find your book.
Yeah. The book is Virtue Bombs. You can find it at Amazon.com or any other bookstore. My website is HollywoodInToto.com. And my podcast every week is called Right on Hollywood.
All right, great. Thanks for coming today. We appreciate